So moving on to chapter 19, you can see I have a quotation here. Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. The last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand. So looking at the global health of an older adult is something that I find is pretty important. You know, I talked about elder abuse in chapter 13, and I think it's crucial that we, recognize that older adults, once a person hits a certain age, that doesn't mean, oh, they're done living. I mean, there's still people who are, rocking the good life at, 80 and 90 years old. So a little introduction. Who is the older adult? At what point do we categorize someone as an older adult or an elder? Is it a person who is elderly? When does one become old? I kind of joke that, when I turned 30, it was like, oh, I'm super old now. Or, if you turn 40 or 50, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so old. But who actually is seen as elderly? When do you become old? And then actually, when does aging begin? So the idea of aging, does that start when you're 16, 18, when you hit these certain milestones within your life? So gerontology is the defined scientific study of aging, and we especially look at that within sociology. And so the field of gerontology really studies older populations starting at age 65. So 65 is kind of turned into that mile marker in your life where, that's maybe when you can start to retire, and maybe you start to be looked at as a older adult, potentially moving on to the elderly population. So chronological age is still the best marker available for making global comparisons of different aging phenomena. So, not everyone ages the same across the world. So different countries are different in regards to how long an individual will live and then what they base as their aging comparisons. So population aging is the process by which older individuals come to form a proportionately larger share of the total population. So you can see on the chart on the next slide, the number of adults in the United States in the 20th century by the millions. So you can see how older adults, those who are 65 and older, have just rapidly increased as the years have gone on. Now, we've talked about it before that we had the baby boom era. So, while there was a lot of babies at some point, now they're turning into older adults. And so that is having an impact on charts like this. But it definitely is looking at population aging. So here is the percentage of older adults in the total U.S. population in the 20th century. So before I showed it to you by the millions, this time it is by the percentage of older adults in the United States. So in looking at old age, it is the most unexpected of all the things that happen to man. So our mortality and morbidity statistics vary. Life expectancy has increased as more people are living to older ages. So people are living into their 80s, 90s, and 100s, and that's having a major impact on the statistics that are coming from our research. So the maximum lifespan record is 122 years. That has not changed. That's still the oldest human on record. And so you can see there's a picture of her listed in your textbook on page 523, Madame Jeanne Calment. She lived in France, so she's not a U.S. individual. She's actually from France. So you can see here on this chart the list of older adults from 60 and older as a percentage of the total world population. So we see that, the total world population, not just the United States, has almost doubled in 2000 and will double in 2050. We can see changes in the mean life expectancy. So from birth and then from age 65, how long can we expect an individual to live? And you can see the differences here between the dotted line and the solid line, where individuals are expected to live longer from the age of 65 compared to what they were from birth in 1900. We see another one, the percent of people surviving to certain ages for selected years within the United States. So this chart specifically looks at, you know, certain time periods. So you can see 1979 compared to 1981, and then you can look at 2000. So the percentage of people compared to, you know, their surviving to certain ages that are available. So you can see that people, you know, more from the 1900s aren't gonna, you know, survive as long as those from the 2000s. You can see population pyramids in regards to gender on this slide, also found on page 526. Population pyramids demonstrating the changes in structure of age groups in the U.S. So again, you can see that darkly shaded portion where the baby boom existed. Further population pyramids comparing between the different years and, you know, projections for 2030. And then the percent of population of ages 65 and older in various regions with projections of 2030. So looking at things in the year 2000, we look at Asia, Europe, Latin America, you know, Northern American, Sub-Saharan Africa, and how the population is going to vary in, you know, 30 years from the point that they've listed this. And so there's some telling information here in regards to who's going to live longer and, you know, how large their population is going to get, or if it's going to get smaller. So in looking at a lot of these different statistics, what we're looking at is the disability adjusted life expectancy. So the World Health Organization developed this concept. And so the meaning is the expected number of years to be lived in full health. So this is, you know, when you're living your life, it's not when you're sick or ill or you've got diseases. This is the amount of time that you are living a healthy life. And you can see I've listed here oldest old is 85 and older, centurions is 100 and older, super centurions is 110 years and older. And so they found that centurions account for the fastest growing segment of the oldest old population, and that approximately 25% of them are in very good health. So we do see that gender differences exist in disability adjusted life expectancy. So at birth, males really outnumber females, but then at midlife, this kind of flip-flops. So the gender ratio is reversed, where the proportion of females to males becomes even more exaggerated as age increases. So you might have wondered, like, well, why does that happen? Why is there a gender differential in, you know, the life expectancy? And usually it's more noticeable in developed countries whose the average gender gap is about 7 years, but gender differences are typically smaller in less developed countries and are sometimes even reversed in some South Asian and Middle Eastern countries. So, you know, it may depend on a woman's social status, whether it's lower, whether, you know, there's societal preference for male children, and that can have a negative impact on female life expectancy. So research and technology have a large impact on the older adult worldwide. So one thing that we look at is the goal of successful aging. And I love this quotation in your textbook that says, as some gerontologists have suggested, we need to focus more on adding life to years and less on adding years to life. So I love that. How can we make life, you know, give more life to our years rather than years onto our life? And so older adults are dealing with, you know, computer technologies and communication. You know, we've created the ability to order goods, email other people, obtain information, work online from home. There's seniornet.org. You know, I don't know if any of your grandparents or parents have, you know, social sites, so Facebook, Instagram. And, you know, there's telemedicine, and there's home robots, smart homes, and aware homes to help older adults in regards to living on their own and being able to do so. As always, there's legal and ethical issues that exist. So, looking at the ethics of aging research, the United States created the IRB. So, that's the Institutional Review Board. If you ever do any type of research, it has to be approved through the IRB. And in order to do research on adults, they're finding that they're seen as a vulnerable group, just like children or pregnant women or prisoners. But you can see down at the bottom, they also state that older adults are not considered vulnerable unless they're impaired. So this could be an older adult maybe with dementia or Alzheimer's that they wouldn't want to complete research on. So you can see I have listed here in 1974, the National Research Act created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And so this was created because we wanted to make sure that the concern for the interests of the subject must always prevail over the interests of science and society. So if you've taken the introduction to sociology class, I briefly talk about how we have to make sure that we keep the privacy of our subjects' information, that we can't just, let it all be released for everyone to find out. So we have to keep in mind the concern of our subjects. So everybody has got to die, but I've always believed an exception would be made in my case. Now what? So that's a quotation from William Saroyan, final statement published after his death at age 72. So a major legal and ethical issue that is discussed with older adults is euthanasia, or sometimes otherwise known as assisted suicide. So assisted suicide is still illegal in most of the United States. This textbook talked about that, since then there were 4 states who legalized physician-assisted suicide, and per the statistic picture that I have at the bottom, there are 18 states, including the District of Columbia, who are considering whether to allow physician-assisted suicide. So one of the most famous cases in regards to that was Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who served a prison sentence for second-degree murder for poisoning the death of a 52-year-old man in Michigan. So he had claimed to have assisted the suicide of at least 130 other individuals. And so different countries, cultures, and religions have differing views in regards to euthanasia, but we're not able to look at all of that at one time. So some other influences on older adults include politics, economics, culture, religion, ageism, family support of the elderly, respect and status, cognitive neuroscience and aging, the aging phenomenon specifically within South America you should look at. But one thing I really wanted to mention was the religious lifestyle in Israel. So they found in 2001 that they have the highest global life expectancy in Israel. So 81.1 years for women and 77.4 years for men. And this has also gone up in 2012. So 11 years later, it was 83.9 for women and 80.3 for men. So what really is most interesting about this is that the small city's longevity record is that life is long in spite of other demographics. So this particular city within Israel, which is the most religious city in Israel, is also the poorest city. So confounding the normal correlation between poverty and poor health, these individuals are impoverished and they're living longer than most individuals do in other countries. So after looking at, the older adult, I like this quotation that says, "Old age is not a disease and cannot be cured." If we all make it to that point, most of us will reach the master status of older adult, or elderly. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, but that is this week's lecture.